I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Jerry Moran spoke in support of the Honoring Our Pact Act on the Senate floor Thursday. The legislation would help veterans who were exposed to toxic substances get access to health care. The Kansas lawmaker touted the act as both historic and bipartisan. Moran explained that the legislation will, quote, deliver on a promise we made as a country to take care of our servicemen and women, both when they deploy and when they come home. Listen in for his full explanation.
Mr. President, I want to speak this morning really to Americans, veterans, and provide an update on our work to get our toxic exposure legislation across the finish line. The Senate is in the midst of considering the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson Honoring Our Pact Act. This is historic. It's bipartisan. I hope that we can keep becoming, when something is bipartisan, it's historic, because we ought to be able to solve these problems for veterans and really for Americans in a way that brings us together and not pulls us apart. And this is an effort to show that that can be done. This legislation will deliver on a promise we made as a country to take care of our servicemen and women, both when they deploy and when they come home. The Heath Robinson Act will provide access to health care and benefits for millions of veterans who are sick from illnesses connected with toxic exposures. When we send our warfighters into harm's way, it is with the understanding that we will have their back. When they come home bearing physical, mental, or invisible wounds of war, we care for those wounds. Toxic wounds should not be treated differently. John Buckley, he's a retired U.S. Army colonel from Andover, Kansas, told me, and I quote him, "Our soldiers were put into dangerous situations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and many who suffered from their wounds or made the ultimate sacrifice have been cared for by our nation. Unfortunately, many, too, have been overlooked and ignored, especially those who are suffering from injuries after having reoccurring and prolonged exposure to toxic fumes, burn pits, and other environmental hazards." This legislation is designed to address what the retired colonel told me. Another Army colonel, this one from Leavenworth, Kansas, Pat Proctor, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, shared that many of the men and women he served with are facing health challenges from being exposed to toxins while deployed. And he said, I quote, there is no telling how many of us will be impacted as we get older. I know many of our veterans live with the lingering fear. Will the toxic exposures from their service catch up with them and leave them with a debilitating disease? And if that happens, will the VA be there? Will Americans be there for them with the health care and benefits they need? William Turner, a former Deputy Commander General of support for the Kansas Fort Riley 1st Infantry Division, told me, our veterans have served in multiple locations where they have been exposed to a number of toxins that have resulted in them developing serious illnesses, and they often struggle to gain access to health care and benefits that can help alleviate some of the pain and suffering they are experiencing. Sometimes we think these issues are something people in Washington, D.C. are talking about, but what we're trying to address is the real circumstances of real Americans who served our nation and who are deserving of our attention. The commanding general went on to say to note this, it is absolutely imperative that we pass this bill to guarantee exposed veterans receive permanent access to health care. Moving legislation through Congress can be a slow and frustrating process. However, this week, when the Senate began debate on our bill, I was encouraged by the resounding show of confidence. This bill, to move forward on this bill, that vote was 86 senators in favor. We're now focused on an amendment process and will continue working as quickly as the Senate will allow to get this bill to the House and back on its way to the President's desk. Whether Democratic or Republican, every member of this chamber represents veterans at home, and I firmly believe that every member in this chamber cares about those veterans. Issues related to veterans often have a way of bringing us together and find consensus, and that's what we've been attempting to do, and we will continue to do as we sort out what amendments could be considered. We were able to deliver veterans' choice through the Mission Act, landmark mental health legislation through the John Scott Hannon Mental Health Improvement Act, and I believe we can do that again on this legislation to deliver care and benefits to all generations of toxic exposed veterans. This country is good at recognizing the physical wounds of war and we're getting better at recognizing the mental wounds of war. But no longer can we ignore the wounds of war from toxic exposure, the wounds like Agent Orange before it that may not arrive until years later. Throughout the remaining procedural votes on the Heath-Robinson Act, I urge my colleagues with remaining questions or concerns to reach out so that we can all together deliver on this promise to those who have borne the battle. I look forward to working with my colleagues to see that this bill crosses the finish line soon. Mr. President, I yield back.